Howdy everybody, this is Omar, your Audio Amigo, back with another Audio Amigo review for y'all. Today we get to check out a debut IEM from a new player in the space. These denim-looking shells belong to the new RumAudio Blues, a 6BA set from RumAudio priced at $200 US. As I mentioned, this is RumAudio's debut IEM, and I honestly can't find a whole lot about the company online. But let's go ahead and see how the Blues is going to stack up in the very competitive $200 segment. After all, first impressions, very important. So, usual disclaimer applies. These RumAudio Blues were sent to me by Linsoul for review. I'm not being paid for this review, but because I could turn around and sell these if I wanted to, I've gone ahead and activated the paid promotion feature here on YouTube. I do these disclaimers because I believe in full transparency when there's potential bias besides my own personal taste at play. Thank you so much to Linsoul for sending these out, and thank you to all of you watching for your continued support. The unboxing experience here on the Blues is fairly straightforward. You get the IEMs, their cable, you get an unbranded leather case, which reminds me a lot of the one on the Symphony-Ears Hexad, actually. You get 3 sets of ear tips, you get 2 sets on this carrier, those being these white silicone with a solid core, with a slightly wider bore than these solid core black ones with a narrower core. And then inside the case, you also get more sort of solid core ones, red in a different shape with different bores on them. So 3 sets of ear tips as well as the case. The case is relatively crush resistant. It's a bit soft, so not super crush resistant. I'd like to see better there. It is soft on the inside, has a nice mesh pouch for putting, DACs and other things. A little bit too large to go in a pocket, but I think it would provide decent protection inside a backpack. For $200, I would consider this a sort of acceptable level of accessories. Case is always nice to see. Wish it was more crush resistant. Honestly, modular cables are becoming more and more standard in the $100 to $200 price range these days. Would have liked to have seen that here, but overall, not bad. So let's take a look at the cable. It reminds me, actually, a lot of the standard cable that comes on basically all the Zigat IEMs. You get the same black 4-wire braid with the 2-wire twist, the same sort of branded, slightly contoured 3.5 millimeter connector, the same strain relief on that. You get the same sort of Y-split, different chin slider. This is a bead, and it slides up and down nice and easy over the sort of rubbery feeling cable. Works well, sits flush, don't mind the chin slider at all. The 2-pin connectors match the rest of the hardware. Again, the only stereo indication you'll get is the color of the actual connectors, so not the biggest fan in the world of that. Yeah, the cable is fine. Like most of the Zigat IEM cables, it sits flat. It's not microphonic. It's maybe a little bit rubberier than I would like. But it's fine. It does the job. It could stand to be better on a $200 IEM, though. So I looked at the cable. Let's check out the Blues themselves. The design and build here is honestly typical. You get all resin shells, resin faceplate, resin nozzles with no sort of mesh over the top. Pretty standard for all BA IEMs like this. No ventilation here on the inside. The only ventilation you get is here on the back. It's this rather small hole for the rear volume on all those BAs. I don't know if these BAs are vented or not. I couldn't really see through the resin with my flashlight, so I can't tell you. One thing I do like is that little dot of resin showing you that this is the left IEM. There's a matching red one on the other one. And while I prefer different colored faceplates, I think that that's a nice touch. I mean, it's super easy to tell right and left IEMs anyway. I just like the stereo indicators. It's pretty cool. The faceplates here feature no additional ventilation. No driver flex on these. These are balanced armatures. What I did get was minor pressure buildup. Not anything awful. It was easily remedied by just more careful insertion. I didn't have to pull out the Sancai tips. It wasn't uncomfortable overall. Outside of that, again, no real physical features that impact the sound. I would expect these would hold up about as well as any other all-resin IEM in terms of sort of abuse or durability. But now let's pull up the specifications. The RumAudio Blues is a 6 balanced armature set. I don't know if that's 3 dual sets, or 2 duals and a solo, or a dual and 4 solos. Any information about these drivers is not on their website, and I wasn't provided any, so I don't know the exact configuration, and if you're one of those people who insists on branded drivers, maybe give this set a pass. Being full resin means that these are nice and light, under 4 grams a piece in terms of weight, and the entire package, cable and all, comes in at just under 30 grams. The nozzles here are rather short and are right at the 6.5mm mark at their widest point. The blues do in fact change sound with impedance adapters or higher output impedance sources, but they won't be an issue to drive overall, as these are some of the easiest to drive IEMs I've tested recently. There's no need to go out and buy a dedicated dongle for this set. Overall, not bad at all, pretty typical for an all BA set, nothing out of the ordinary. Moving on to the cool wall. It's going to be a rather short segment. I don't think RumAudio was really trying here. You have what looks like denim type fabric with the words rum and blues on them in silver. They don't really catch my eye in any way. They're not flashy, dynamic, industrial, or anything. They're just bland. So there you go. Not a whole lot to say here, just bland little IEMs. Just because I say they're bland doesn't mean it's the truth, so let's check out what the Council of Ladies has to say about these. Well, that just goes to show what I know. Not a single vote for not pretty. 3 mez and 2 pretties. So I guess these do work for the ladies on some level. Checking out the compliments, we find lady number 5 with the belief that these are genuinely nice, but she's the only one that would actually hand out compliments on these. Let's check in on their thoughts. The word of the day here is understated, which I guess makes me feel a little bit better about how I graded these myself. Mostly, though, I'm surprised at how well the blues did here with the ladies' thoughts. I guess denim does technically go with anything, which kind of explains it. And yeah, sure. Well done, RumAudio. I may not have liked them, but the ladies thought they were okay. In terms of comfort, the RumAudio Blues uses a semi-custom shell design. You've got a bit of a bulge there, you've got a comfort wing here, a recessed here, an offset nozzle, all the sort of semi-custom shell type features. For me, this was no problem. The blues slotted into my ears nicely. I was able to wear them for long periods of time, no issues at all. The pressure buildup was a thing, but it wasn't as bad as I've experienced on other sets, and I was able to remedy it with just sort of an angled insertion technique. My wife gave these a score of laughably bad on the tiny ear test. She said that the shells were shaped all wrong for her. They wiggled free and lost seal almost immediately with any sort of mouth movement. Once again, as with all semi-custom shells, I will say try to audition these before you buy them, or if you're going to buy them from a store with a consumer-friendly returns policy that will let you return them if they don't fit you at all. But now let's get into the sound of the blues, kicking things off as we always do with the bass. Y'all have heard me talk about planar bass before. Well, the RumAudio Blues has what people call balanced armature bass. For me, it's similar to planar bass in that it's fast, articulate, and it doesn't penalize the mid-range for being boosted as much as the dynamic driver would. But the BAs lack some of the air-moving power that large planars or dynamic drivers can have. What that results in is very light, articulate bass that lacks punch and sort of dynamism. Tiesto's classic Suburban Train has all the low notes replayed well. They're lacking a little bit of rumble, they're lacking the sort of buzz, the punch, the slam, all of those wonderful bass energy words. They're there, and they're accurately replayed. They're just missing the energy, which you could argue is not accurately replayed. Things do improve a bit as you move towards the kick drums and bass guitar. There is a little bit more of a boost here, and the texture of the bass does improve. The sort of big whoof of the bass drum in Earth, Wind & Fire's Let's Groove actually feels like it's moving some air in my ears, and it has decent impact for me. While the sub bass might not be as rumbly and buzzy as I would like, the extension is there, it's just not as textured as I would like, and the mid bass is actually quite nice. It's still sort of BA bass, but it's nice nonetheless. The warmth from that mid bass doesn't really bleed into the mid-range too much, and instead makes for those richer, warmer lower mids that I personally prefer. Curtis Mayfield's Pusherman, I think, replays very well on this set. The guitars, bongos, bass guitar all come through very nicely with no masking or issues with the overall layering. The tonality is quite nice, the bass guitar isn't lacking in energy, and the vocals, I think, are just the cherry on top. Pretty good replay here. Female vocals are very well balanced, not too forward, not too recessed, just sort of tonally right for me. Gloria Estefan's 1, 2, 3 sounds really nice. Her vocals don't fall in line with the instrumentation, nor do they sound like they're sort of behind the instrumentation. They're where they're supposed to be, up front, but not with a spotlight on them. There's no husky or nasal tonality imparted onto her vocals from the rest of the frequency range. The fundamentals are very well represented in the mix with no real tonal aberration. The song sounds good. The mids are very straightforward. Other than a little bit of warmth on the lower end, there's nothing out of the ordinary with this mid-range, which I think is pretty good. The upper mids and treble are boosted, but not overdone. Female vocal harmonics add the nice depth and dimension to vocals that I typically listen for. Rocío Dúrcal's Amor Eterno has her sort of emotional, passionate delivery that throws off a lot of these harmonics. She rolls her R's, she changes her pitch, she sustains these long notes, and the blues make that voice have the sort of gravitas that I expect it to have without sort of blowing the harmonics out of the water with sibilance or overt sharpness. Percussion and instrument harmonics are mostly the same story. Cymbals are relatively well recreated with no extraneous wash or sort of blunted decay. Certain tones and instruments can come across a little bit sharper than others, however. I heard it in Leonard Skinner's Simple Man. You have the hi-hats and the crash cymbals that are sort of going on the whole song. But when the guitar solo kicks in, he starts hitting the bell on the ride cymbal, or it could be the crash, I don't know. But the bell hits are a bit sharper compared to the rest of the percussion that I'm used to listening to. Not to the point where it was sibilant or fatiguing, it was just a little bit more energetic than I was expecting, a little uneven, if you will. Besides that unevenness, I think that the upper mids and treble are actually pretty well done. There's a good amount of sparkle, good airiness, and all that energy up here isn't really fatiguing, at least to me. In terms of technical performance, the blues I think does pretty decent. I already talked about how the bass can be a bit soft, but that doesn't mean it can't render those low frequency events. The big drums in D'Angelo's Unshaken are there, and while they might not have all of the texture that I prefer, the drum skin, the feel of it on the finger still comes through in the replay. It's just not as dynamic as I would like. Bass guitar is maybe a hair softer than I prefer, but it's still nuanced and the strings do ring. The blues did decently in my standard Waltz for Debbie test. The background conversation was rendered well. The hits and strikes on the glassware that I typically listen for were all there, so long as I was focusing on them. Considering the more relaxing tuning on this set, I think it did pretty well. In terms of pure technical performance, if I was to compare it to sort of other all-BA sets, I would put it around the level of the AFUL MagicOne, not quite reaching the Kiwi Ears Orchestra Lite. The stereo separation in Perceive 3D Soundstage is decent on the blues. I typically use the Supreme's Baby Love as a sibilance test, but it has that sort of tap shoe clapping at the beginning that moves from far left to far right and then back again. You get some really great width on the staging here on the blues. It's very clearly defined with no bleeding from one side into the other, and it doesn't feel sort of compressed. As far as the Perceive 3D Soundstage goes, I had no issues pointing out where the instruments were coming from in Ahmad Jamal's Dolphin Dance. The imaging was very solid. I didn't get the impression the track was being crushed down. I felt like this set did very well with well-mastered tracks. It doesn't feel like it's constricting them, if you know what I mean. Overall, I would say the blues is about average for other IEMs at this price point, at least in terms of imaging, Perceive 3D Soundstage, and stereo separation. So let's go ahead and jump into the effects of impedance adapters or higher output impedance sources. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the graph here for y'all. As you can see, the blues becomes a bit bassier and a bit less airy, and the upper mids get boosted while the rest of the mids take a bit of a dip. It's an interesting effect. What I personally hear the most here is the increase in the bass response. The texture does improve a little bit. The rumble becomes a bit more pronounced. It gets a little bit punchier overall. Still nowhere near what I would call bass head levels, but it is an overall improvement in the bass. If you have this set and you have an impedance adapter lying around, I would say give it a shot and see how you feel about it. So, the RumAudio Blues then. It's going a sort of warmish leaning, neutral, mild V-shaped-ish tuning, depending on who you're talking to. It's got decent bass for an all-BA set, nice but not overcooked treble extension, and a pretty smooth mid-range. It's a fairly standard tuning for what some people bill as a studio set. I like it. It's just nice. I enjoyed listening to it. For comparisons, I've gathered a few other all-BA sets here, as well as a single DD set, to show sort of what the tuning is like if you venture outside the waters of all balanced armature sets. Let's start off with a bit of an appreciation segment for an old friend, that being the AFUL MagicOne, priced at $140 US. The MagicOne is, on paper at least, very different to the RumAudio Blues. Instead of 6 balanced armatures and a crossover board, the Magic One is using a single, lonely balanced armature, a passive tuning board, and a whole mess of acoustic structures. Interesting thing is, despite those very different configurations, these two actually sound quite similar, to the point where I actually had to start nitpicking the A-B session with them. The blues felt more incisive. It was a bit sharper, more aggressive, especially in the treble with certain tones compared to the Magic One. The Magic One, on the other hand, was smoother, had what I felt was slightly better bass texture, and it came off just a bit warmer to me overall. If you want an all BA set with this tuning, you have two choices here. You can get something a little bit sharper, a little bit more incisive in the treble, with the blues, or you can go with smoother, warmer, a bit more relaxing with the Magic One. I already told you, in terms of technical performance, it's very, very close. Yes, I know it's 1 BA versus 6. I do think the blues do have a bit more resolution up at the top end, but I'm telling you, it's not by much, and I think the low end on the awful it just feels better to me. Personally speaking, between these two, I would go Magic One, but I know a lot of folks who would prefer the more incisive tonality of the blues. So we have a single BA set. Why not bring in a 2 BA set with the much maligned SeeAudio Yume IV, priced at $200 US. I feel like the Yume IV gets a lot of negative attention, mostly because it went ahead and eschewed the family tradition and ditched the dynamic driver that all three of its sisters had. I do plan on doing a whole video on the Yume IV and its sister, the regular Yume, but for now we'll go ahead and just use it as a comparison point for the blues here. The Yume IV makes the blues look honestly pretty V-shaped. The Yume IV has a very neutral vocal and mid-centric sort of anti-shout tonality with more subdued bass. The blues is going to come off as punchier, rumblier in the bass, more sparkly up in the treble. The Yume IV, as I said, has that anti-shout, mid-range focus tuning that has a bit of a special sauce with female vocals. If you're a pure sort of J-pop or K-pop enjoyer, you might really enjoy the Yume IV compared to the blues, but if you want that more dynamic sound with more sparkle, more bass, the blues and its 4 extra balanced armatures are definitely going to give that to you. Let's take a break from the balanced armature bonanza and bring in the Moondrop Kadenz, priced at $220 US. The Kadenz, to me, came off as a smoother, more vocal forward, cleaner sounding IEM compared to the blues. The bass here on the Kadenz is rumblier, it has nicer punch and better texture thanks to it being a dynamic driver. The treble isn't as sharp as it is on the blues. It is, however, smoother while retaining the good overall detail retrieval here. The blues, I think, can come off as more relaxing thanks to the more filled-in lower mids, and while the bass texture just isn't there compared to the Kadenz, the incision in the treble will really be prized by some listeners, even if to me it's a bit uneven. It's a pretty interesting comparison. It shows how two different companies use two different driver configurations to approach what ended up being a pretty similar tuning, honestly. And to wrap up, let's bring in one of the sort of classic all-BA sets in this price range, that being the Kiwi Ears Orchestra Lite, priced at $250 US. Now, Orchestra Lite is a very nice set of IEMs, but it was never really one of my favorites to listen to due to its handling of the lower mids. It has that classic lower mids cut, meaning that it comes across to me sounding lean, thin, and sort of anemic in the lower mids and sort of upper bass. Both of these sets have that less tactile, faster BA bass that I've been talking about, but the blues comes across more V-shaped with extra warmth in the lower mids and extra treble energy. The Orchestra Lite has cleaner mids, and it's one of those sets that I feel really shines with female vocals, maybe at the expense of the instrumentation rather than sort of shining above it. If that's what you want, and the sort of beautiful, gorgeous build on the Orchestra Lite is more to your liking, I still think this is a solid choice. Personally, though, I would prefer the more filled-in lower mids on the blues for more of my library compared to the Orchestra Lite. So the blues, then. It's ish sort of a take on the Moondrop VSD-F tuning on the Kadenz, So if you like this tuning, but you prefer the speed and sharpness of BAs to the heft and body of a dynamic driver, it can be a good alternative to the Moondrop single DD sets. If you want something that measures flatter, maybe you prefer the sort of anti-shout tuning, more mid-centric, or you just adore female vocals, the Yume IV I think is an interesting choice at the same price. I really need to do a video on this thing. It's interesting. Orchestra Lite is another one that does female vocals well, but it has a much more conventional harmonish lower tuning with the corresponding recession in the lower mids that y'all know I don't prefer. And then finally, the MagicOne, which I really love. It, to me, feels like a warmer, smoother, better looking version of the RumAudio Blues, but for less money. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. So before I spoil any more of my conclusion, let's bring up the Audio Amigo Arbitrary rating scale and see if we can't find a place to fit in the Blues. The Blues is a good IEM. It's got good technical performance, a relaxing, neutral-ish tuning, good tonal balance, and bass for an all-BA set I think is actually pretty decent. My main gripes are the slight pressure buildup issues that are common for all BA sets, and the quite boring and understated looks. This is another case where I was really enjoying listening to the set up until I started doing comparisons, and the one that really stuck in my craw, as y'all could tell, was the MagicOne. I already sort of spoiled it, but the Blues is essentially a more boring looking, sharper, more uneven sounding, more incisive, more expensive version of the awful MagicOne. It does have better technical performance, but in exchange you have to deal with a slightly more uneven treble presentation. When the MagicOne goes on sale, it drops down below $100. And I just said the technical performance between these two is not all that much. They're very even. So the price gap, even at full price, isn't really worth it in my opinion. Side-by-side listening, I preferred the better textured bass and the smoother but still detailed treble on the MagicOne versus the sharper but more uneven treble on the Blues. So I think the Blues is going to slot appropriately into the good tier, which is one slot below where the MagicOne is. Quick reminder, my entire tier list is at MSRP, so the MagicOne in that spot is at $140, and I thought that was a bit difficult to justify. I like the RumAudio Blues. I just don't think it stands out in a very crowded and very competitive $200 price bracket. Even as an all-BA set, it has very stiff competition, and I just don't think it does enough to feel special enough for me to recommend it over the MagicOne. And I think maybe if it was a bit cheaper, it would be a better deal. That leads me rather neatly into the recommendation section. Who should be checking out the RumAudio Blues? Well, I wouldn't recommend it to bassheads or people who prefer dynamic driver tonality in the low end. I also wouldn't recommend it to people who are looking for a super exciting or colored listening experience. If, however, you tried the MagicOne and it didn't fit your ears, or if you thought that it was missing some sharpness or aggressiveness in the treble, this can maybe be a slight nudge in the right direction. I would recommend this if you're looking for a more understated IEM compared to the MagicOne or the Yume IV or even the Orchestra Lite. Having a more understated IEM for commuting or travel can make more sense than a sort of sparkly, colorful one. Something that doesn't draw any attention can be rather nice. I do think, I just said it earlier, that like the MagicOne, the Blues might not be worth its MSRP for me personally. I think that if, like the MagicOne, it sees deep discounts, it can be a much better, more competitive deal. If you can get a Blues for $20 more than what you can get a MagicOne for, I would say, yeah, that's a pretty decent price. But if the MagicOne is saving you $30 or more, in my opinion, it is the better buy. But that's going to do it for the RumAudio Blues. It's a warmer take on an all-BA signature from a new company. Unfortunately, other companies have tried this sort of tuning, and at the price range they chose, it just doesn't stand out all that much. Hopefully RumAudio can take this and use it as a springboard to improve upon things for their next models. Either something more expensive that's maybe a bit more competitive, or something cheaper that's a better value. Thank you again to Linsoul for sending me this set for review. I really appreciate it. Coming up next, we've got a budget set. It's the Astratech GX100. But for now, I want to say thank you all so much for watching. I appreciate all your continued support. I really hope you enjoyed the video. This has been Omar with Audio Amigo Reviews, and I will catch y'all next time.